Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this session on multi-stakeholder data bridges, making data work for cross-domain grand challenges. Greetings to those of you who are here virtually and those of you who are in the room at Bern. I'm glad that some people can make it there, and we're very glad to have you with us. I'm Simon Hodson, Executive Director of CODATA, and I'll be chairing this session. What do we mean by multi-stakeholder data bridges and making data work for global grand challenges? This is a repeat session, but it's not exactly the same as it was a year ago. Things have moved on. Our speaker lineup is a little bit different. The topic's a little bit different, and I think we've made some progress with these issues. If we look around the world at the present day, we consider the grand challenges that we have. The contribution of science and then science for policy to address these grand challenges ultimately rests on our ability to gather and combine data, because without data, without information, it's very hard to us to know precisely how to act. In a very different context, someone said, you cannot manage what you can't measure. Now, the context in which that was said was very different, but the aphorism remains important, I think. The organization that I manage, CODATA, the Committee on Data, is part of the International Science Council. The International Science Council, in its action plan, identified a number of significant challenges for science globally. Among those is this challenge of gathering and combining data, what we call interoperability. How can we take data from a number of different sources, combine them such that we can understand and then address a complex issue or complex challenge? CODATA was asked to prepare a program of activity to help address these issues, and that program is scheduled to last for at least a year. So in our jargon, we call that our decadal program of making data work for global grand challenges. In that, we're working with a number of partners on two related approaches. On the one hand, we're looking at case studies, whether those be in health or urban issues or climate change or disaster risk reduction. And then on the other hand, we're looking at technical solutions that help us combine data more effectively. They could be FAIR vocabularies, they could be metadata specifications, they could be ontologies or other technical solutions. And we tried to, of course, to bring those together and to have the technical solutions implemented in the case studies and to learn about technical solutions from those case studies. So this session will present some of those partnerships. Some of the presenters in the session are very much working with CODATA. Others are working in parallel activities with which we're interested and with which we're engaged. And we hope that as a result of this session, we will inform the audience and the participants about these activities, about the case studies we're looking into, about the technologies which we're exploring. And we also invite your participation and engagement, and we'll say a little bit more about that at the end of the session. We're going to be very short of time. Each speaker has only 8 minutes, and so I'm going to hand over now to our first speaker, who is Henriette Keizers, who's strategic advisor to the Secretariat of the United Nations System of Chief Executives Board for Coordination. And Henriette will talk to us about the UN Data Cube for reporting financial data and the way in which that integrates data in the UN system. Henriette, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Let me start with the technology, see if it works, and share my screen. It should be okay. this one. Here we go. As many of you know, the UN is a big family. There's more than 50 UN entities. So to enable coordination of the efforts across the UN system, the UN is actually continuously building bridges, often in the form of policies, but also through work on data standards. So in my short intervention, I want to talk about the Data Cube initiative and its relevance for monitoring grand challenges, such as the SDGs or our common agenda. So the Data Cube initiative resulted in 2018 in the adoption of 6 UN data standards for system-wide reporting of financial information. Together, they constitute a solid data bridge for the annual UN system-wide reporting of revenue and expenditures to the Chief Executive's Board. We're talking here about roughly 50 billion, over 50 billion in revenue and expenditures per year. So what are those data standards? If you look at the graphic at the bottom, you will see them. We have the WHO standards, which indicates which UN entity is performing what function. Is it humanitarian or development, peace or global agenda? Where are they operating using the M49 geographical location? How are they doing this? What type of financing instruments? Why are they doing this? Maybe the most important question. To what SDG goal or target is it linked? And ultimately also the revenue by contributor. 4 of these standards have already been mandatory from January 2019. And the last 2, the SDG and the location standard, are becoming mandatory at the end of this year. So this would mean that by next year, if all goes well, the UN should have, for the first time in its history, a comprehensive view of what the UN system is delivering in support of a specific SDG in a specific location that's split down to development, humanitarian, and peace interventions. For example, how much is the UN spending on Goal 16 in Kosovo? And what about Goal 5 in Sudan? The importance of the Data Cube initiative was underscored and was included as one of the strategic data use cases in the Secretary General's 2020 data strategy. We were super pleased with that, I can tell you. But of course, the initiative is not just limited to building data bridges between UN entities, but also with the International Aid and Transparency Initiative, ERT, and with OECD. Maximizing transparency, minimizing effort. That's our tagline. So the code list for the 6 data standards have already been harmonized with these 2 partners. And we're now working with them on a UNCB minimum data set that should have some agreed additional variables, the gender marker, the OECD sector code, financial variables, that we can then use for activity level reporting by all UN entities to ERT and OECD. And then in a few years' time, all UN entities should be able to use one data set derived from their own systems and then slice it and dice it as necessary to publish comparable data sets to the CB, to ERT, and OECD, as the graphic shows. So for what cross-domain grand challenges would the UN system-wide data sets that result from all this work then be used? First, of course, when we developed it, we thought of the SDGs. But the example I want to mention today is our common agenda. Last year, the UN celebrated its 75th anniversary. On that occasion, the UN member states adopted a declaration with 12 commitments, summarized in the icons on the left. Leave no one behind, protect our planet, build trust, ensure sustainable financing are some of them. As you look at commitment 8, it talks about upgrade the UN. Upgrades that the UN becomes more effective and more nimble. And the data is an important element of this transformation of the UN. Building on the UN data strategy, the UN Secretary General wants to turn the UN into a state-of-the-art data analyst and communicator for the benefit of the world. The work on data standards is also relevant for monitoring the UN's contribution to the 12 commitments in our common agenda. So on the right, you can see what data we think we could use to do so. For example, the disaggregated financial data for each SDG in each country, combined with the OECD DAC sector codes, and for example, the gender marker, will be important to track the sources for commitment 1, like leave no one behind, or commitment 5 on women and girls. And using the expanded UN minimum data set for reporting to IATA and OECD should make sure that the UN system-wide data on financing for development and humanitarian intervention will be available on those platforms as well. And then talking about interoperability and combining data, Simon, so we hope to combine them with also with data sets that measure SDG results so that we can monitor and evaluate the UN's contribution to the SDG agenda or to our common agenda. To conclude, the UN data standards have enabled the UN to build a solid data bridge between the UN entities with the IATA and OECD that helps the UN system to address the grand challenges of our time and ultimately to make better decisions and deliver stronger support to those we serve. I'll stop sharing here. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Henriette. Colleagues virtually and in the room, we will run through all the presentations and then have questions and discussion at the end. So I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Pierluigi Buttigieg from GeoMar, which is part of the Helmholtz Association, and it's the Center for Ocean Research at Kiel. And Pierluigi will talk to us about the harmonization of ontologies for the Oceans Decade. I'm sure you're all aware that it's the Oceans Decade, and the harmonization of ontologies, like the interventions that Henriette has just introduced to, is essential for combining data in that context. Pierluigi, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, so this will be a very brief tour of a need that we have on aligning ontologies, on harmonizing them for very diverse and globally reaching initiatives like the UN Ocean Decade and related activities that are underpinning it, like those done by the IODE of UNESCO IOC. So we'll jump right into it. And one of the key points is, why do we need early semantic harmonization? Again, semantics is the study of meaning. What do we mean when we talk about things like data? What is our data about? It's a very simple question, but often, even when you have the right data formats and standards, you have stakeholders who are not bridged on the understanding of what their data is actually about. Are you using the same meaning for a forest or a coastline or a manganese nodule field? These are concepts that we think we understand, but when we get to the details, it's often not so clear. And that's why we need to be sure, before we embark on our digital expeditions, that we're quite sure that we're talking about the same thing. And that's where we come into things like ontologies and terminologies and thesauri. You'll hear more about that later from Alejandra, but we have to make sure that what we think our data is about is the same thing as what others think it's about. And that's where we use semantic technologies and resources to help us as humans agree, but also machines, because these are computable in a graph format on the web. That's very, very important to start things off. So when we see something like that, we have a word in our head, volcanic eruption, it's going on. And again, the application of semantic technologies, the development of these, will help make sure that a machine can understand the web of association of meaning and of phenomena, so that even if you didn't search or you're not looking for data exactly about a volcanic eruption, but any one of those other things, you can still find it. Your systems can find it. More data can be brought together to solve grand challenges that are always wicked problems. They're always complex and have many dimensions. And that's one of the key elements of interoperability in the FAIR principles too, that you must be using a language for knowledge representation. That is an ontology. It could also be a thesaurus. It has to be one of these resources that allows us to represent what we as humans mean to a machine. And that's the initiative there. Of course, there are many of them. People are excited about it. And there are many initiatives, and they're all very valuable across something called the semantic ladder, where you have things like ontologies that are heavy, detailed semantics, but they take long to build, or things like controlled vocabularies, which can't do that much in terms of semantic expression, but at least stabilize the language. And they all have a place, and there's a lot of activity. But the problem is that they don't just work together. If two or three groups are developing ontologies for deep sea environments, they don't necessarily mean that the machines will understand what one says in the other. So we need to collaborate, and we need to bridge the developers of these standards to make sure that users don't have to choose between them. So that's the need for harmonization activity, to bring together the experts of the problem with the experts developing the semantic technology so that we can align and harmonize them. In the UNESCO IOC system, we're particularly concerned about this because we have an initiative operating now under IODE IOC, where with the UN decade coming, but also in general, there's a need to bridge many digital resources across the ocean with thematic issues that are very, very far-reaching. But of course, we have regional and local data repositories that are not necessarily interoperating or talking to one another. Therefore, IODE is developing an ocean data and information system together with other partners that aims to link these stakeholders. And yes, we will get to data itself, but first we also have to link across meaning. Are we talking about, with our metadata, the same kind of things? So the Ocean Info Hub project is a demonstration of that. And we're moving away from building monolithic hubs of data, which can be quite fragile. And when funding ends, they also tend to fall apart. We're moving towards something more about using the web as the central hub, using linked data technologies and semantics to help people find resources. So that's our motivation there. And we're going to link a lot of UN systems, our UNESCO, IOC systems, with other external partners and other regional initiatives. So that's going to be a lot of different kinds of meaning and a lot of need of harmonizing our understanding of those meanings. So how can we do it? In a group called the Earth Science Information Partners, ESIP, there was a semantic harmonization cluster built for cryosphere terms. And over there, we found a way that works quite well. We bring together experts in the domain with semantic technology developers of key references, of key standards, and bring them together along the things that they're talking about, things like icebergs or coastal developments, what have you. And we make sure that the resources themselves are agreeing on the meaning and linking to one another. So we do this every month, and I think this is a model that's bringing together communities too, because we're bridging it in the background, the semantic standard itself. We are finishing a cryosphere initiative. We have started now one for hazards and disasters, initially focusing on wildfires. And the question is now, how do we bring this to the ocean? And that's one of the things that I and others will be working on to try to bring together stakeholders in the same way, to bring together some of the major semantic initiatives in this space and get them talking to each other in the background. So users don't then have to choose one because the work has been done at the standards level. And that includes early work with marine debris and plastics semantics, as well as more established work with oceanographic features that have been done by the BODC. So there's a lot of work in that direction. And then stakeholders like Ocean Info Hub or Otis or anyone else can pick that work up and be sure that at least on the standards level, there is already interoperation for free, so to speak. This is just some of the work that happens, the need to bridge these standards between things like NERC, things like the environment ontology in the OBO Foundry space. And that's the technical side of it, but that also requires the stakeholders who actually deal with these, the experts, the scientists, the social scientists, etc., to help guide that confluence of meaning. So that when machines discover these things on the web, they know that there's some expert knowledge behind it, and they don't have to worry about one or the other resource competing, but rather collaborating, right? There is then a simple way we're exchanging these. This is on the technical level too, to make it easier for more stakeholders to pick up this mapping, this fine-grained mapping, and build a more interoperating space with greater confidence. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you very much, Pierluigi. That was great. And I think that will lead in very well to what Alejandra in particular has to say later. So thank you very much, Pierluigi. Our next speaker is Virginia Murray from UK Health Security Agency, sorry, I couldn't remember the new name. And Virginia has an announcement for us, and we'll talk about the hazard information profiles. Virginia, over to you.
You can see my screen, Simon?
We can, yes.
Pierluigi, this is totally in harmony with what you're talking about. This is the UNDRR and the International Science Council Hazard Definition and Classification Hazard Information Profile Supplement. So in the Sendai framework, there was a call for all hazards to be reported by all UN member states and many other partners. And one of the things we know is there's been a lack of standardized definitions of hazards and a lack of guidance on the full range of hazards. So you're talking about oceans, which fits totally into the work that we've been doing. We published in July last year, I've been the chair of the technical working group, this report. What it did was to bring together many UN agencies and organizations under UNDRR, including UNESCO, of course, and the IOC and many of the others, but the World Meteorological Organization, the World Health Organization, the FAO and others. But we also brought together a huge number of our science partners, including integrated research on disaster risk, but most importantly for us today, CODATA, GEM, and many others. We brought together our industrial science partners via the Insurance Development Forum and our international humanitarian organizations via the International Federation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent. By working with them and many more who volunteered and running surveys, we ended up by trying to identify what the hazards are under the UN General Assembly definition of a hazard as a process, phenomenon, or human activity that may cause harm or damage. We've reviewed huge numbers of scientific hazard glossaries. Yes, we are aware, Pierluigi, but also many others, the UN glossaries, the Sendai Hazard Monitor, many lists, and worked on surveys and others. And we ended up with 302 hazards of hazard types, which I will show you in a moment. So they include the hydrometeorological, some of them are ocean, but the extraterrestrial, but also the geohazards, and indeed the environmental hazards of wildfires and others, and of course the biological hazards which COVID has brought us so clearly to see, as well as the chemical hazards and indeed the technological hazards. But we've also included for completeness the societal hazards. It's not part of Sendai, but it's something that was thought to be very useful. We know there's a need for a regular review and update of this and to facilitate the development of a multi-hazard information system, which Simon Cox, I hope, will talk about a little bit. Engaging with users at all sectors and working on evidence-based national risk assessment processes and many others to reduce the risk of disasters, but also addressing, as COVID has shown us, the need to look at cascading and complex hazards and risks. But today we publish this. This is the hazard information profiles, the supplement to the original report last year. And I have Cancer online, for who I thank hugely, but there are many, many others of you who've been involved in this work. So the launch has been today from the UNDRR with all their links, as well as the International Science Council. It is a partnership that I am so grateful for, as we all are. Each of the hazard information profiles have a primary definition, preferably something at the highest possible authority, preferably from the UN, that the UN member states feel comfortable with, along with an expanded scientific definition, metrics, any UN conventions, any essential annotations, and the ownership of the definition, which is the organization that holds this particular hazard as one of the ones they're most concerned about, and that they lead on at the UN or other partners. So I show you heat waves for the hydrological and meteorological after the summer that we've had, particularly in the United States and in Western Canada. But I also think geomagnetic storms and the risk of solar mass ejections are really important. Lava flows, think about what's happening in the Canaries at the moment. And what about the loss of mangroves, something that is really of concern to us. But mercury as a chemical has its very own UN convention about how we can reduce it. And the Zika virus is one of the pandemics that's caused so much harm. COVID, of course, is the only hazard that is a draft hazard. It's not a final version of the hazard information profile. We're still learning so much about it. But COVID has caused huge healthcare waste. And so I'm just showing you this is one of our technological hazards. And of course, with COVID has been a huge issue of financial shock. But each of these messages are relatively brief. Few are more than 4 pages, even the tsunami ones. But the whole message is to make it really powerful and strong, useful, usable and used, because UNDRR and International Science Council feel these profiles will support the Sendai framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course the Oceans Decade, as well as the Paris Agreement on Climate Change by providing a common set of hazard definitions for monitoring and reviewing implementation, which calls for that data revolution we need so badly, Simon, of rigorous accountability mechanisms and renewed global partnerships delivering on fair data. So to summarize, each of these different hazards are UN profiles are there. The review was out last year, the information profile today. I've shown you merely 8 of the 302 hazard information profiles, and we have the launch that is going forward through the International Science Council and through UNDRR as we speak today. Simon Cox, I think you may be online, and I know you very kindly as one of our CODATA Executive Committee colleagues and somebody who's been contributing to our technical working group, want to add a comment or two. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Yes, just a couple of comments. Because of the process of developing the hazard information profiles and the reviewing process, as Virginia says, they've just been published today. That means that we're now able to move on to the next phase of making these available through a variety of modes. And the one that I'm going to be focusing on is publishing the hazard information profiles on the web in machine readable form as what's known as linked data. This links in with the previous presentation from Pierluigi, in fact, because the intention is to join the hazard information profiles with other definitions and resources in the form that Pierluigi was mentioning. We have some templates ready to go to work with the HIPs, and so we'll be moving forward with those, publishing them through UNDRR and International Science Council starting now, basically. That's me.
Thank you, Simon. Virginia, are you going to, do you have anything more or is...
No, I'm just so thrilled by the support we've had from CODATA and what a wonderful partnership. And we all need to work together to see if these really deliver everything that is required to be useful, usable, and used by all the people we wish to involve. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Thank you, Simon, for that codicil to Virginia's presentation as well about the next steps. For those that are interested, I've put into the chat the link to an article in PLOS, 10 Simple Rules for Making Vocabulary Fair, of which Simon Cox and Alejandra are among the authors. And it's that methodology which is going to be applied to those UNDRR hazard information profiles. So thank you very much both, and we'll move on now to the next speaker, which is Chifundo Kanjala, who's a metadata professional working in Malawi on a project which combines demographic health data, clinical data, and more recently, data about the COVID pandemic. And Chifundo will tell us about that. Over to you, Chifundo.
Thank you very much, Simon. So a good day, everyone. I'm going to present today about the Inspire East Africa project, which is building a robust governance and fair data infrastructure for population health research in Africa. I'm doing the presentation on behalf of several of my colleagues listed here, including Arafan, who will be talking to us later. So INSPIRE stands for Implementation Network for Sharing Population Information from Research Entities. And it seeks to strengthen networks of population health data producers and users. And it seeks also to mature data harmonization models that have been used in the past within our settings and processes for scalability and fair data sharing. So the long-term objectives of INSPIRE are to address the scalability issues using generic data models and to promote fair data by implementing data standards and the provenance of those data. And also building a user base of policymakers and analysts. So phase one of the INSPIRE project, which sought to create, establish a network of longitudinal population studies in Africa, and to prototype some technical infrastructure, was funded by the Digital Innovation for Development in Africa under the UKRI, and it ended in May this year. I've provided a link to a document that summarizes the outputs from this project. So the Inspire team is currently working on a project called Inspire Pitch, where Pitch stands for Platform for Evaluation and Analysis of COVID-19 Harmonized Data. What Pitch seeks to do is to apply the Inspire model to the integration, analysis, and sharing of COVID-19 data. It was funded by the IDRC and CEDA, and runs up to end of next year. Among the other objectives, seeks to develop new analysis using the power of AI and data science. And we are only, within Pitch, we're focusing on data from Kenya and Malawi. I'll just give a little bit of detail around the Inspire Data Hub. So at its core, it is a cloud-based platform with the Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership, OMAP, Common Data Model. At its core, and as it says, it's implemented on the cloud. We're currently using Microsoft Azure, but other service providers would equally work. So we have the Common Data Model at the center, and to bring data from various sources into the Common Data Model for integration and standardization, we use a set of on-ramp services. So this would include profiling of data, documentation of those data, and ETLs, that data transformations that would take data into the Common Data Model. And on the other end, once the data have been integrated, a mechanism for drawing insights out of those integrated or standardized data is a set of what we're calling off-ramp services. And through those, data consumers such as policymakers and researchers can then be able to access the data out of the Data Hub. So I would like to take a little bit of time concentrating on how we are bringing FAIR to the Inspire platform, because this Common Data Model, the OMAP Common Data Model, has a lot of structured metadata around the variables or the columns within the tables of the database. There isn't much at a high level that would describe, for example, the studies, the context within which the source data were generated, but also the analysis results or the mechanisms for creating data for analysis. There isn't a lot of metadata to describe that. So we are trying to, within Inspire, to fill in those gaps. So for the various data sources, we are generating some minimum metadata to accompany those data. The way we are doing that is when we identify various sources of COVID-19 data in Kenya or in Malawi, we have a bespoke data inventory form where we capture summary descriptors of the data sources that we are getting hold of. So we're creating an inventory of those data. And then there's a mapping between this data inventory form that's being used to fields within the data documentation initiative code version. Some of the work that we've done in the past enables us to map from DDI codebook into schema.org. So at the end of the day, we will have discoverable descriptions, at least, of the source data. Around the data transformations that we do from the source data into OMAP, we are in the process of developing an implementation guide which provides a framework for guiding data engineers converting data from source data into OMAP. Within this implementation guide, we do the mapping of the various concepts in the source data into the standardized vocabularies within OMAP. And we also add other metadata to guide the data transformations, these ETLs that have to be done, and also to facilitate automated generation of data catalogs. Once the data are within this common data model, there's an idea or a concept of what is called a cohort within OMAP. So this is a set of persons who satisfy one or more inclusion criteria for a duration of time. So these cohorts within the OMAP concepts provide the building blocks for working with the research, for defining and responding to a research question. So the way they are set up is that usually they're set up to be updated as new data become available within the database. But we find out that some of the analysis that have to be done require static data sets, for reproducibility of analysis results, for ownership, tracking. So to facilitate that, we have come up with what we're calling an immutable cohort store. So once a cohort is defined within OMAP, we kind of freeze it in time so that the information about that cohort persists, about the state of the data at the time the code was generated remains persistent. So these are sort of the key three ways in which we are promoting FAIR within Inspire. I've included a couple of links to provide more details about the project. Thank you. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Chifundo. That was great. Okay, our last presenter in this session is Alejandra Gonzalez Beltran, who will talk to us about good practice and guidelines for semantic interoperability. Alejandra, over to you.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, everyone. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on from where you are joining. So I'm Alejandra Gonzalez Beltran, and I work at the Science and Technology Facilities Council in the UK. And I'm going to talk about good practices and guidelines for semantic interoperability. So hopefully bringing many of the topics that have been discussed together in this talk. So, so much for testing. There it is. Why do we need semantic interoperability, first of all, and what is it? So semantic interoperability is defined as the ability of computer systems to exchange data with an ambiguous shared meaning. And we've heard a lot about meaning in this in the previous talks. So why do we need it? And again, bringing together what it's been said, to address global challenges, we know that we need data-driven solutions that required a standardized data collection, data democratization, and open standards and machine-readable format. So the data must be available in these ways to enable us to do, for example, data integration. Even in those cases, there is still a challenge on how to resolve ambiguity of definitions from multiple data sources. And this is where the harmonization process that Pierluigi described before comes into play to bring semantic interoperability. So I think it's better to look at an example. So in this case, two tables, so the headers of two tables that show open data on COVID-19 vaccination. And as you can see here, this show vaccines per age, per area. In this case is per country. The second table is provided with the data dictionary, which means each of the columns are associated with a type and a definition of what that column information is. The first table doesn't provide that data dictionary. So again, a human may start building some links between these two and realize that date is available in both, dose and age band corresponds to age group. There are other challenges as well here in terms of, for example, spatial resolution is different in the two tables. But going back on the meaning, as that's what this talk is about, we want a way to say that the population at the top is really the same as the population in the other table. So ideally, we would like these headers annotated with terms from FAIR vocabularies. And I will go into what we mean by FAIR vocabulary. Similarly, the values of the different columns should also be annotated with FAIR vocabularies when relevant. So how do we achieve this semantic interoperability? By following FAIR vocabularies that are vocabularies that adhere to the FAIR data principles. And again, in that semantic ladder that Pierluigi mentioned, are all those representations that are findable. So they are registered in a community service or portal. They provide persistent identifiers for the whole vocabulary and for the individual terms. It's accessible in the sense that it's reachable by a standard protocol. It's available in machine and human readable representations. It's interoperable because it's encoded in a standard representation language, and there are mappings to other vocabularies. Again, this is a lot about this harmonization that was mentioned earlier. And in terms of its reusability, it has a clear and accessible license. There is a clear maintenance process, and definitions and provenance metadata per term are available. So again, going back to the example, why it is useful to have the annotations with FAIR vocabularies. It will help us know if the reference in different data sets mean the same thing. So again, this is building data bridges. It also allows us to annotate the data using terms like the chemicals, the proteins, the hazards information that Virginia and Simon mentioned earlier. So in summary, our vocabularies that are trusted by a community are based on a standard, are machine actionable, and allow us to do these data bridges and data integration. So how do you build the FAIR vocabulary? So as it was mentioned, Simon and myself and other colleagues wrote this article with 10 simple rules for making a vocabulary FAIR. We really focus on a specific use case where the assumptions are that there is a need to annotate data. So there is a community that needs a controlled vocabulary. There is a legacy vocabulary, could be a book, could be so a list of terms of definitions in some form that it could be printed, like the hazard information profiles that were mentioned, but there is no FAIR vocabulary, so no machine accessible vocabulary that is available for this community. So we came up with 10 simple rules, simple, assuming that there is a lot of technical background, we agree, but we go from the governance aspects of the vocabulary up to the technical representation. And I won't go into the details of the 10 rules, but you are welcome to review the paper and get in touch. In addition to the paper, we have compiled a website that you can find through that link there, firstvocabularies.github.io, in which we are compiling a growing number of resources and guidelines that support the whole life cycle of FAIR vocabularies and its applications. So we started with how to make a FAIR vocabulary. We are moving on to how to maintain it, how to find existing vocabularies that may be relevant, to create links, and so on. So to conclude, I hope I've provided a good summary of all the talks where we showed that data-driven analysis are needed to address the global challenges in an evidence-based way. These approaches do pose many integration challenges, and semantic interoperability is an enabler for that, building indeed data bridges between different sources and allowing us to resolve the ambiguity in terms definitions. So FAIR vocabularies are needed for semantic interoperability, and guidelines, tools, and training continue to be needed in different domains to enable people to use and produce FAIR vocabularies. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejandra, and thank you very much to all our speakers for sticking to time. And I hope participants, both there in Bern and online, can see the connection between each and all of those presentations. The emphasis upon vocabularies and alignment, the emphasis upon making those vocabularies fair, and the emphasis upon systems and metadata specifications to bring them together. I'm going to hand over now to Arifin Gregory, who's a metadata consultant with CODATA and the DDI Alliance, who will lead a structured discussion on the themes of this session. Arifin, over to you.
Hello, Simon, can you see that? Is that okay?
We can indeed. Thanks, Arifin, that's great.
I've been sort of sitting here listening to the presentations and just kind of put together a couple of slides really quickly to sort of summarize my impression of what's going on here. We did this session once before, and I think things are impressive, but mostly, especially after watching Virginia's presentation with all the pictures of the different disasters, I'm scared. It is clear that the grand challenges we face are a pressing reality. I live in the US, and she talked a little bit about the forest fires and some of the other things going on there. And I think when you look at COVID and the impact of climate change, and you look at the various themes that we've been touching on here, there's no question but that this stuff is not just important, but that it's an increasingly important phenomenon in terms of society everywhere in the world. And that each one of these things is a huge problem. It requires cross-cutting research to have sort of data-driven policy. And the presentations here are not coming just from different domains, but also cutting across different institutional levels. And I think that that's an important part of what we're looking at here. We're hearing a lot about vocabularies and harmonization and some of the efforts to make data interoperable, which is obviously a critical ingredient of this. And obviously that work is ongoing. I'll talk my impressions about that in a minute, but it seems to me that the urgency of this is actually increasing. It's just a reflection on the presentations. I'm also impressed with the number of different initiatives at the UN level and at the national level, scientific kinds of initiatives and standards bodies. It's hard to unpack it or to list out, I think, all the different groups that are involved in kind of the presentations. But in reading between the lines, I'm seeing a lot of involvement, some mentioned, some not mentioned explicitly, but there are a lot of standards and technologies in addition to the semantic ones that I think we're more focused on here. I think that represents a lot of progress, and I'm heartened to see that the presentations this time around showed an increasing degree of reality, of practicality, in terms of taking approaches that have been identified and pushing them closer to being completely real. Now, that does not mean that the collaboration and coordination that this is based on is finished yet. We still have a huge need for that kind of work, and you see some beginnings, but it has to go a lot further, I think. I also think, though, that we're seeing a lot of ongoing initiatives begin to join forces. And I was very happy to see some of the presentations that show that the dots are starting to connect, like Virginia's profiles being expressed according to the 10 guidelines. I mean, you see different pieces of work beginning to come together in a good way. And that's one example, I think, of several. I sort of think we're in an all-hands-on-deck situation. The Decadal program is based on facilitating that kind of collaboration and coordination, and I think it's doing a good job of that. But I don't know if this is just an American thing, but we have this phrase, all hands on deck, that when the ship is sinking, everybody needs to pitch in to keep the ship afloat. And I sort of feel like in the face of some of these of the grand challenges, that's the situation we're in. It gives me hope a little bit to see that the progress being made in some of these areas is quite real and increasingly real. And so I guess that's just sort of my takeaway from this. I do have some questions for people, but before I say I get to those, I just want to say, if people are interested in getting involved, people in the audience, here's some contact information for CODATA. Now, CODATA is certainly not the only organization working on this kind of collaboration, and both on the sort of international agency and governmental side, and also on the scientific side, there are a lot of different organizations focused on these issues. But if you need one place to start, there's the CODATA email address, and you can send any kind of questions or ideas to that email. There's a thing called the Virtual SciDataCon coming up in later this month, and that's something that might be of interest to you. And then there's a CODATA news list. As I say, CODATA is one among a set of organizations that are looking at these issues, but we're certainly happy to help you get involved if you're interested in that. Obviously, you can tell that I think you should. In terms of questions, I was noticing something here, and I'd be interested to hear from Virginia or Henrietta, Pierluigi, any of you really, about FAIR, because FAIR seemed to me to be quite core to a lot of these presentations and a lot of the ideas here. And I know that it has a huge amount of currency in the world of scientific research. I was curious, and maybe you can start with this, Henrietta. Are the FAIR principles and the idea of fair data sharing, is that an idea that has a lot of currency within the UN organizations? Or is that not the way that people think about these issues? I was just curious.
Let me just give an honest answer. So,
Yes, please.
In preparation for this session, this is the first time I heard about the FAIR principles, because ultimately, the people which we've been talking to on the UN data standards, these are controllers, people who are in finance section, they know of the international accounting principles, stuff like that. So we looked at IPSAS and UNSAS and all those things, but not so much at what exists in the scientific community. So I wish I had known this 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe we could have gone a lot faster, but that's a different story.
Well, I have a following question for you. And I know within the social sciences, where I do a lot of work, the OECD has been a maintainer of a thesaurus that is very, very much used in that community for a lot of terminology. But and I noticed that they were working with the UN a lot in terms of the data standards you were talking about. Is there an interest in exposing this data for the benefit of scientific users as well as more governmental users? Is that part of the intention here behind the work that you were presenting?
I think not really. So, because we were especially looking at financial flows. So it's saying like, how can the Secretary General, if he's asked, how much is your UN system spending on oceans, spending on coral reefs, any of the SDG targets, so to speak, how can he give an answer? We know that different UN organizations are doing different things in different countries, but we didn't have all this information together. So the lack of interoperability of data and data quality issues, that made us start this initiative. So, but the UN is big, I can't talk for the rest.
So, Pierluigi, it seemed to me when you were talking that there actually was an awareness of FAIR within certainly UNESCO. Is that right? In the material that you were sort of presenting, is FAIR a thing in the oceans work that you were talking about?
Let's not forget, like, we are in this context of the UN the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. So these worlds are coming together. But I wouldn't say it would be under the banner of FAIR necessarily historically. Let's not forget that FAIR was a way of simplifying some good practices that are already done by many stakeholders out there in the digital world. The UN system itself, it has its document archives, it has thesauri like Genet, it's had them for a long time. So the DNA of FAIR is in the system, certainly. It just maybe hasn't been articulated in quite the same way with the same kind of, let's say, community spirit around it. But it certainly is raising its profile, particularly because of the confluence of science and sustainable development during the decade. But even beforehand, there was an awareness of it. And certainly the themes, the individual themes of FAIR, they're not new, certainly. It's just formalized a little bit better, and people are now thinking about performance indicators or other diagnostics based on them. So I think it's more a question of re-articulating and packaging good practices in a way that is understood by other communities too.
Luigi, I had another question for you, actually. You indicated that before you got involved with the oceans work, that there was harmonization going on in a lot of other areas, like around wildfires, I think was one of the examples you gave. I was curious to ask you, what is your perception in terms of coverage across the various domains? I mean, Virginia presents this set of profiles that is very, very broad, all encompassing in some way. Is your sense that the kind of harmonization work that's going on with the oceans work, how far along is that? I'm just curious, because it seems like that's a very large body of work when you're actually harmonizing all of the different vocabularies that are out there.
It's true, it is a large body of work, and there aren't terribly many people who know how to do this across all of those different resources. So it's quite at early stages. There have been like jumps and starts, voluntary work primarily. And often what's missing is someone to tell the semantic experts and domain experts where to focus for maximum societal impact or societal relevance. So this is very welcome to hear the targets sort of identified by UNDRR, etc., because that I've already shared it with these communities. One does when one's on a Zoom call to give us new targets to say, all right, here's some work we have now, and this is very important. You have definitions that are agreed by a UN body of experts. Now, that wording is much more than technical. There's a lot of nuance in there. And that's something that must be recorded next to the scientific definition, but also then where the semantic tech people come in, next to a definition that's consistent with the way that a machine would understand it. It's a little bit drier, but follows some logical rules. But if we have that confluence of all of those different perspectives, we can start developing some very interesting knowledge representation technologies. But that's the key. We need to be directed by people who identify those priorities, and then we can converge, particularly now because things like the UN Ocean Decade are motivating scientific funders who often support the semantics work to have a stronger link to societal relevance of research.
Arifan, can I chip in?
Leads me to my next. I was just going to ask you to chip in, Virginia, so please.
I can't resist the temptation. Pierluigi, to us, working across all the UN partners has been absolutely critical, as well as our science colleagues. But the whole purpose of this is to improve the reporting for the Sendai Framework Monitor, for the SDGs, and indeed for the Climate Change Agreement. By taking these hazard definitions to the people who will be reporting under the Sendai Framework Monitor, hopefully through the networks, through disaster-related statistics, we are trying to introduce a language that may not be perfect, but that does have the highest level of scientific definition. We can agree as a primary definition from the UN bodies of note, but also we've tried to include scientific definitions where necessary. So really trying to engage with many. So Pierluigi, your comments will be amazing when you see this. And I'm so pleased that today we celebrate it's out. It's been a lot of work for many.
I can imagine. And Arifan, if I may, what I see there is like it's an encapsulated system. You need to build a reporting system. There is a definite need. The system has a certain fitness for purpose, that the data is flowing into reporting mechanisms. But you also then have those nodes where new innovation can connect with the existing system. And then in the next round of global goals, we're far better prepared. Things are already poised to interact with that. So having a bit of a long view on the digital strategy part of it is also quite essential.
So Hans Pfeifenberger, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. I think you have your hand up. Did you have a question for us?
Yes, please. My name is Hans Pfeifenberger, indeed. I wanted to mention that while we did a 20 years review for on GBIF together with colleagues from CODATA, or actually CODATA did it for GBIF, and I think yes, many terms like FAIR and the importance of machine readability are new to many, but I want to go back to the human readability again, actually. and what it means for the maintenance and for the simplicity of the 10 principles in particular. What we found that well, we have all heard here now presentations in English, and we tend to think in our sphere that everybody understands and uses English, especially in science, but that is not true, as we found out very severely. That is as well true for Asia as well as South America and so on. So how would you try to actually implement multi-language ontologies and terminologies, etc., and how to maintain them? I think this is an important piece of work to be done in this global setting. Thank you.
Interesting that you say that, Hans, because this came up actually in a workshop that Simon and I and a number of other people here were at last week. But it's I think an important topic. There are technological solutions for multilingual vocabularies, for example, and those are actually embedded kind of in the 10 guidelines in terms of the technical approaches they recommend. I think that does not necessarily address the other aspects of that problem, and I'm not sure. Like you say, I think that there's a solution at the technical level. Is there a solution in terms of governance and in terms of the actual production and dissemination of these things? I don't know if other people have viewpoints on that, but I know that that's a topic that certainly comes up in these discussions, and it's not something people are unaware of. Whether it's something that has a sort of agreed solution at this point, I'm not sure from an organizational perspective. I mean, Alejandra, you were involved in the 10 guidelines. Did that come up in your discussions? The issue of doing multilingual vocabularies?
Yes, it did. And actually, we are continuing. So we are a working group that we continue to work, and we are discussing as well issues of governance, where indeed, I mean, so the point is, what is the primary resource that you consider as producing these fair vocabularies eventually? And indeed, there are many considerations across languages that we need to consider. So as Arafat mentioned, there are some technical solutions that could be implemented for some automatic translation, but in the end, there is a lot of work around the experts. And as it was mentioned, and is also part of the session name, there are multi-stakeholders that need to be involved. So, and indeed, this covers people from different backgrounds in terms of the technical aspects, so domain experts versus the experts in data engineering side of things, plus indeed different languages involved. And there are examples of vocabularies, for example, DCAT, which I'm also part of together with Simon. We do try to embed other languages within the terms definitions as much as possible.
So Chifundo, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I know OMOP, which you mentioned at the heart of the Inspire work, is very vocabulary driven. Does it support multilingual vocabularies? Is that something that's come up in the Inspire context at this point or not? Chifundo, are you with us?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I'm here. I think outside Inspire is involved with the development of fair vocabularies together with the IUSSP, which is an international body that brings together population studies and demography experts. So it's doing the work together with CODATA. Within that context, I think the discussion is including what could be done to cater for the multilingual aspects. Within the projects that I work on, we certainly get a lot of data in various languages when at collection point. But but there isn't much, as far as I understand, that's being done. Entry of those data into databases. So beyond that, the processing and the analysis of those data is mainly in English. So there are a lot of data in various languages. What's being done beyond just entry into computer systems, I'm not too sure. I don't think there is much.
I do know that topic has come up in the IUSSP Chifunda. I was just curious if you had seen that up to date and Inspire, but the answer, I do think IUSSP may be the forum that we turn to for that. But
Right.
So are we reaching time here, Simon? Is this I don't know how to handle the timing here.
We've gone a little bit over. I think we can take another couple of minutes. There is a plenary session at the UN Data Forum, both physically and virtually, at 1:15. So we should wrap up in the next couple of minutes. So what I would suggest is that if there's any questions from the floor, we can take one more question and then we'll close. I'm not seeing any hands up. Last chance to ask a question before we close the session.
Nope.
Virginia mentions a resource from FAO on multilingual vocabularies. Okay, so seeing no further questions, I would like to start wrapping up this session. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their input. I think that was fantastic. I really hope that the participants, both in Bern and online, could see how there were connections between those presentations, and there is a shared endeavor to make vocabularies for all, to establish those vocabularies, first of all, to do the sort of work that Virginia and Henriette mentioned, to make those vocabulary fair and to link them in various ways online, even if one's not using the terminology of the FAIR principles, but that's what's there in the UN Data Cube. And then to apply them to particular research projects, as we heard in various ways from Pierluigi Cifundo and others. And I hope you saw with the arc of the session with Alejandro reiterating what it is to create a FAIR principle, and then Arafan summing up the various connections with initiatives and research projects globally. So we will post the recordings and the presentations online. All the people that registered to the Zoom session will receive a message with a link to the recording, the presentations, and I've had requests for the chat, so we'll share the chat, or at least the resources that were shared in the chat as well. Please do get in touch. We hope that you have an excellent time at the remaining sessions of the UN Data Forum, and that you'll stay in touch about the initiatives that we've been talking about. So thank you very much. Thanks to all the speakers, thanks to the participants, and we'll see you soon.
Recording stopped.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to close and carry on.